We all know that castling and king safety is super important in chess, but how do we know when to castle queenside? Now, this can be a bit of a mystery, but in order to improve your chess, you need to understand when and how to castle, so that's what we're covering today. And as always, we've got a bunch of live examples to go through so you guys can see these principles in action and apply them to your games right away. Last but not least, just to introduce myself, my name is Philip and I'm a 2100 rated player from New Zealand, and I make these videos to help you get to 2000 ELO and beyond. So if you get value out of these, consider subscribing. Alright, the very first thing we need to understand is what is the purpose of castling? And this is a two-part answer. Firstly, castling gets our king to safety very quickly, and it tucks him away into the corner. And the second part is it helps get our rook into the action much quicker than other ways. So that's the beauty of castling, and that is why we do it. And that's very important to remember for the rest of these examples. So when would we consider castling queenside? The main answer is when we are trying to attack our opponent on the king side. And this is a generalization. There are many nuances, but generally it's when we're trying to attack our opponent on the king side. So this is a good example. This is a Najdorf Sicilian, and in these structures, white will typically castle queenside, hoping for black to castle kingside, and then white will just unleash a pawn storm and attack black this way. Now, one very key principle to understand about castling and castling queenside is white is proactive and black is reactive. So what do I mean by that? As white, you are likely to castle queenside when you are trying to attack black on the king side, like we just said. But as black, you are likely to castle queenside mostly when it is just no longer safe to castle on the king side. So this is a really good example actually where black is in no rush to castle kingside because that's just going to walk into this white attack right off the bat. So here, black is better off just playing bishop to b7 and developing the queenside pieces because there's still some pieces to go. And maybe, depending on how the position goes, let's just say, king b1 is played, knight c6, and then if white pushes too hard later in the game at the right moment, black might just decide to castle queenside as well and say, hey, look, I want none of this action on the king side. I'm going to castle queenside as well. And I think I've got enough pieces around my king to protect me. Whereas on the king side, I'm just going to get slaughtered. So proactive for white, reactive for black, typically. Now, let's take a look at another example. This is a cousin, very close brother or cousin or whatever it is to the Najdorf Sicilian. This is the Dragon Sicilian. So black gets that fianchetto g7 bishop, the dragon. And in this type of a position, black will castle kingside and white will typically castle queenside, and it's the same structure. The e4 pawn supported by f3 and then g4, h4, etc., attacking black on the kingside. Now, if I just go back a couple of moves here, so white has just castled. What you'll notice is both sides, both examples rather, white has 3 pawns here, a2, b2, c2, and here, a2, b2, c2. And I'll show you why that's important as a pattern to recognize. One thing about castling I should just mention is because you are trying to protect your king, the most important reason you'd castle is to get your king to safety. You want to castle where your pawn structure makes sense to castle in that direction. So imagine there's more pieces on this board, but if white has no protective pawns on the king side, it doesn't really make much sense for white to castle kingside here. White would rather castle queenside, and black would rather castle kingside, all things being equal. So let's take a look at this, and this is a very important one to look at, and I'll show you why. C, D, and E pawns are missing for both sides. Now, what this symbolizes is these 3 pawns for both sides are the most commonly pushed pawns in the opening. So you're either going to go d4 and c4 with queen's gambit type position, and then e3, or you might play e4 and then maybe a c3 and d4 type situation. But these 3 pawns move almost in every opening. So the key thing about this is this shows you why it's most common that players will castle kingside. Because if white castles kingside here, white is very protected, which is why we're castling in the first place. In this case, white castling queenside does not protect the king as well as castling kingside. So likewise for black, black will want to go kingside and then his king is safe there. But this is why thematically most likely both sides are most likely to castle kingside. Now let's take a look at this example. So in this example, only the D and E pawns are missing. And why is this important? Because here, castling queenside for white is actually more acceptable, because now white has more protection around his king, and let's just say black castles kingside. White is just one move, king b1, away from being very, very safe on the queen side. So now this is probably a good example to go through where we can kind of see when to and when not to castle queenside. We've covered a couple of examples where we would castle queenside as white, these Sicilian setups. Now, if we go to this one here again, let's ask ourselves the question, all right, we are white, it's white to move. Should we castle kingside or queenside? Let's play it out. If we castle queenside, our pawn structure is not that great on the queen side, or rather the pawn structure is fine, but we've just got way too much air around our king. And black is just going to take advantage of that with a6 or maybe even c6 and start chopping down and opening lines for his pieces to come in. So that's not good. So by default, because it's not good for white to castle queenside here, white will castle kingside. Okay, so let's do the same exercise for black. Should black castle queenside? Well, again, the problem is white has a lot of space on the queen side, and white's going to continue with a5 and b6 and attack and rip open that queen side. So black, again, is also better off castling kingside. So you end up with the situation where most chess games, you're better off castling kingside. Again, unless you are white and trying to attack black on the king side. It's very rare, not super rare, but it is much rarer than other permutations, that black is the one castling queenside to attack white. So here's a good example. Again, here we've got Queen's Gambit declined, d4, d5, c4, and some pieces have been developed. Let's think about it from black's perspective. It's black to move. Should black castle queenside? The answer is probably not, because it's just going to take quite a bit of time to get these queenside bishop and queen out of the way to be able to castle, and then also that c pawn has already moved. So we're going to be in a world of pain when that c file opens, and it's just going to be quite weak for black. So black by default will say, I am much safer on the king side, so I'm going to castle my king this way. Now, if white started getting fancy here and castled, you'll notice, this is where we start seeing patterns in chess, a2, b2, and white does not have a c2 pawn here. White's pawn is on c4. So it is different to these examples in the Sicilian that we looked at the start, where white had those 3 coverage pawns. In this case, black is simply going to take, b5, bishop d3, and after bishop b7, black is threatening to put a rook on c8, eyeballing that queen and the king, and then b4, c5, the position opens up, queen a5 is coming, knight d5 is coming. It's just very, very loose for white, and again, the whole purpose of castling is to get your king to safety, and white has not achieved that. So in this case, again, white is going to follow suit and castle kingside. So hopefully you're starting to see a pattern where when to castle queenside is sort of answered by saying most times we're going to castle kingside because due to the process of elimination, it's not a good idea to castle queenside. However, it's very likely sometimes in Sicilian type defenses, and when you have A2, B2, and C2 pawns, as white you might decide to attack on the king side. Last but not least, this is an example game between Gukesh and Ding from their recent World Championship match. This is game 1. Ding won the game as black. And we've got a French defense set up here, closed center. It is white to move. Ding has just played A5, knight F3. So here, Ding can play bishop to E7 and castle, but what do we say about black being reactive and white being proactive? Here, it's quite clear that white is going to try attack on the king side. So black does not want to commit his king to the king side if it's just going to come under fire. So Ding played a few moves that involved not castling the king, but just getting a lot of the other play on the queen side developed. And when we go to this position, you can kind of see this is move 15, and again, Ding is just not castling, but Gukesh on the other side is preparing for a kingside attack. Now let's fast forward from move 15 up to move 31. The dust has settled a little bit, and you can kind of see now it's black to move. This is a situation where Ding castled because it was safe enough to castle. So for 30 moves, Ding had his king in the middle of the board because that's where it was safest. He didn't castle queenside or kingside. And just to go back actually, this is an instructive point. Knight c4 was played here. If the position developed in a certain way, Ding always has the option to play bishop to b7 and either castle queenside or just keep the king on d8 or e8. So sometimes it is way better just to not castle because castling commits your king to one side. Now if we fast forward again to when Ding castled, so here Ding is castled on move 31, only 5 moves later you see how weak white's king is actually now in this case. Because the queen has just taken that g4 pawn and it is black who is running the show, attacking white. White's king is not safe, and a few moves later Gukesh resigned and Ding won the first game of their world championship. Anyway, lots that we've covered in this video. I hope you guys enjoyed it, but the punchline is you want to assess both options at all times, queenside castling and kingside castling. You don't want to commit if you are, mostly if you're black, but also as white. You don't want to commit if you're going to run into an attack. So you sometimes want to keep the king in the center, but it is far more common than any other permutation that both sides will just castle kingside, because like we saw from a process of elimination, when that c pawn moves, when that d pawn moves, when that e pawn moves, it is very risky to castle queenside, and that's why queenside castling is so uncommon. Anyway, hope you guys enjoyed that, and hope you guys apply those principles to your games. Peace out and see you guys in the next video.